When the bees are nestled in the hive, it provides a perfect opportunity for a beekeeper to do indoor activities. I recently had a chance to go to Old York Cellars in Ringoes, New Jersey, and talk to Scott and Roger Gares about how to do mead making. They're doing bench trials. They're a winery that makes primarily grape wines, but occasionally they make fruit wines. They're running through a bunch of trials to see if they can get a mead product for the winery. Scott is the winemaker and Roger keeps the bees on the property, and they took us through a step-by-step process for how they process the mead for the bench trial that they're doing. This is where they're trying to find the right combination to get a product that they can put in their store. So let's get right to it. We'll get started with mead making, Old York Cellars.
Well, we got our honey here. We got a little bit more than a gallon. What we plan on doing is about a gallon. It's about a 4-to-1 ratio. Our carboy is a little bit over a 5-gallon carboy that we have. Always want a little bit of space on top. During fermentation, you get a little bit of bubbling occurring.
Yeah.
You might get foaming, depends on the type of yeast you use. I'm using a little bit more of a lower foam yeast, 71B is the type of yeast that we're doing a bench trial on. I've used a couple different yeasts in the past. I've used an R2, wasn't happy with that. I've used a Pasture Red, wasn't happy with that characteristic to it. There's a lot of different yeasts. You can go through catalogs and stuff like that, of different yeasts and stuff. This is one that we made beforehand. It's got a little residual to it. It's nice and clear. Came out nice and clean. It's got a nice characteristic to it. Light, crisp, and that's sort of the characteristic that we're looking for.
A little bit sweet. Right.
A little bit, not real overly sweet. I'm a big foodie person, so I always like to pair foods with different wines and stuff. If you make things too sweet, you're not going to be able to pair food.
Try to bring a little flavor of the honey back. Same way when he makes his grape wines, he tries to bring a little of the fruit flavor out in the wine. He doesn't cover it up with a lot of oak or anything like that.
The honey you're using, spring honey, fall honey? This
is a late honey. This one here was a spring real light honey.
Yeah.
But I'm going to try some of the darker, a little bit more flavor with this one. Like I say, we're doing some tests to try to see what we can get to produce for the vineyard itself, the winery. I've got bees at this location, other locations, but we're...
How many hives do you have on this property?
I've got 10 on this property here.
Yeah. And so you're working with the formula to try and get it right so that you can come up with a product that you can sell alongside the wine, right?
Yeah, something that would be able to be commercialized and stuff like that. Right now, the bench trials that we're coming up with, like I said, we're coming up with different yeasts. You can go through a catalog and there's hundreds of different types of yeast that you can get. That's going to affect the taste of your wine, and same with the honey. The style of the honey, whether it's a alfalfa, whether it's a wildflower, any type of different honey, that's going to change your characteristics too. Just like in grapes, you know, you got Cabernet, Chardonnay, Riesling. That's all going to change the taste of the wine itself too. Right. So the same thing with the honey. Honey's going to always change different characteristics as well.
So you have how much?
There's a little bit over a gallon. So we're going to mix into this second container here. I got the honey is about 60 degrees right now. The water I have, because I'm diluting down with regular tap water, that's about 95 degrees. So I'm going to blend the two, hopefully come up with somewhere or something.
And you said a 4-to-1 ratio, right?
It's about 4-to-1 ratio.
Okay.
And we'll be doing some testing with that as well.
Yep. Okay. And everything is scrupulous clean, I'm assuming?
Yes, everything. I did that prior to coming into here today. Did all that already.
As you can see, this honey's a little bit on the darker side. It's got a little bit more stronger honey flavor than what we used prior.
Yeah. Does the color of the honey affect the outcome of the product?
To an extent, yeah. I mean, color's always going to transfer through.
Right.
We've tried with some cider, which is apple cider and honey, which Scott really didn't like the taste on that one.
Yeah.
They have all the different products that you can make mead like, right? You could add apple cider, you could add different spices.
Fruits. spices.
There's like 6 branches of the Mead configuration, right? So
We're trying to get one with just honey perfected before we experiment with some other ones.
yeah, that makes sense. Stay with the.
Like I say, we've tried now with 3, 4 different yeasts. Now we're trying the same yeast we used last time with a little bit darker honey.
And Scott, you have 4 marked here. You have all the different markings on there to make sure you have it right.
Yeah. What I'm looking to do is, once I get this last picture in here, I'm going to start blending it. I'm going to drill gun.
That's okay.
Got to get it mixed in.
So you mix it, and one of the questions I asked while you were mixing it was, when you mix it, you're obviously going to introduce air, you're going to get bubbles into it. Is there a concern about that, or?
Once the initial fermentation comes over, the yeast eating the sugar is going to change over to CO2 and alcohol and heat. So you're going to monitor with the temperatures now in this room now. I have temperatures about 65 degrees, which is going to be good because it's going to create a slow fermentation.
Okay.
The slower the fermentation, the better characteristics you're going to get because you're not extracting all the heat. Well, when the yeast builds up a lot of heat, all that heat coming out of the top, that's all your characteristics, that's all your flavors.
Okay.
So with a cooler fermentation, that's what I do with a lot of my grape wines as well. The whites, I generally do about a fermentation of about 50 degrees onto it. And I do a little bit lighter style onto it, and I get a little bit more characteristics out of it and stuff.
So Roger, you gave him a refractometer. He's going to
Measure the sugar content in it. We want to try to get it at least about 22 bricks for a good fermentation.
What is a brick?
It's a measure of sugar or sweetness into it. And what happens, the yeast eats the sugar, which makes your alcohol.
Okay.
So for good fermentation and a good alcohol content in mead or wine or anything you're brewing, you want enough sugar for that yeast to eat up and make your alcohol.
Okay. And what are you doing with the refractometer? What are you looking for?
I'm looking for about 22 bricks. 22 bricks, usually then when I get done with the finished product, I'm looking to about 12.5% alcohol.
Yeah.
So the lower the bricks, the less alcohol you're going to get. The higher the bricks, the more alcohol you're going to get when it converts over. So I'm sort of looking for that 22, 23.
And you've been slowly adding water here. I'm assuming you want to be patient, right? Is just add it to the point where you get it, and then slowly until you tuned it to where you want the sugar content,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You know, the other stuff, pH and that sort of stuff, you can always adjust those later. If you want something that has a little bit more acidity, or the way that it's going to come out now, it's going to be a little bit softer because of the tap water has got a higher pH to it.
Okay.
So it's going to be softer. It's not going to be nearly as acidic as like comparison to like a Riesling or something that's going to be very acidic. This is going to be a little bit softer.
So the tap water we have here is well water. Some people making this would make this in a city or someplace where there's not the quality of water that we have.
No, but you can go, and if you're making smaller batches like this, you can always go and get, your distilled water. You can go get,
Spring water, bottled water.
The other thing that we're going to be doing is going into the yeast. We'll get into that a little bit. The yeast, I'm going to have to hydrate the yeast, so that's going to take a while as well.
Okay.
You need to hydrate your yeast to about the 5 gallons that we're going to be doing here. You do about 200 parts per million of yeast onto it, which you always find your parts per million through liters.
Okay.
And then multiply your liters by 0.2. That would be 200 parts per million when they talk about ratios and stuff. What that'll do then is that there's going to be about 4 grams of yeast.
And for what it's worth, you're just using this device to start.
I'm just using this to stir.
It's
The
not
other
as
thing I
much
use the hydrometer there.
So this device you're using is, you're just stirring it.
Yeah, this is a wine thief. If I had barrels in here, you'd be able to see that I take samples out of a barrel. So it's a wine thief is what it is. But
Yeah.
also what I use it for is testing for residual. I'll fill it up and I'll put this hydrometer in there.
Okay.
The hydrometer has numbers onto it, and it'll give you, percentage of sugar, balling, whether it also gives you a specific gravity, and that's sort of what we're looking for. And
Are you reading the number here at the top of the level?
Yeah,
or?
right where the liquid level is,
Yeah.
which is going to be our mead, and where it is on here. So right now we're at 22 bricks.
Which is exactly where we wanted it to be.
Yep,
Cool.
exactly.
Neat.
So once I start with the yeast and stuff like that, the yeast I'm going to be doing, I'm going to hydrate that. And I'll hydrate the yeast, and that's going to take a little while to hydrate because you want to make sure that it's alive. You just can't take yeast that's been frozen in the refrigerator
Right.
and just dump it in. You're going to put it into a shop.
Yeah.
You're going to end up killing a lot of your yeast. You don't want it to go through a wild yeast fermentation, because your wild yeast fermentation that's in the air, then it's just going to produce alcohol. And you're not going to get any of your flavors that you're looking for.
Okay.
The flavors that you're looking for is what you're trying to install into it and give it the characteristics that you want. So you're going to be looking at putting in the yeast that you want, get the fermentation that you want to bring out. Like I said, different yeast will give you different characteristics.
You can add our honey mix to the carboy and add the yeast to it later.
Don't spill a precious job, right?
That's the thing when you're making small batches like this. Every ounce matters. Different when we're working with tons and tons of grapes and stuff
Right.
like that. And you're like, oh, all right, an ounce here, an ounce there. But when you're on a smaller scale like this and you're doing some research, you really want to make sure that you got everything that you can.
As you can see, some of the tanks in the background will hold 1,000 gallons of wine. So here we're really working with a small dose comparison to that.
You have a similar type activity when you make a wine, where you do small batches like this just to test things out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the varieties that we have here on the property too, I only have like maybe 1 or 2 rows of them planted. So I'm only doing maybe 50 or 60 gallons of that varietal.
Yeah.
So I'm looking to I'm on a smaller scale on that. So I do have some other tanks that hold, 100 gallons.
And occasionally we'll do a batch with a different yeast, a small batch, just to experiment with that yeast and the flavor. We have our initial batch, in which we will add a yeast to and let ferment up. As you can see, we want to leave some head space on the jug for your gassing off, because as it does ferment, especially if the temperature gets a little warm, it will actually almost like boil, creating gas as it vapor off. Okay, here is an airlock that we put on this while it's going through its fermentation stage. It has a trap into it, just like your sink has into it. It will let the gases escape from your fermentation. When the yeast is consuming the sugar in your mixture, it gives off a gas. You want to let this gas escape, but not oxygen come back in. So there's water in this trap. We will put it in the top. The gas can bubble out and escape, but it doesn't let the air come back in to contaminate your mixture.
So what I'm doing now is I'm going to hydrate the yeast. What I have here is a little bit of water from out of tap. It's at 104 degrees. You want things at 104 degrees when you hydrate your yeast. And the mixture that we did with 5 gallons, it works out to be about 4 grams of yeast. So I just want to hydrate that, put that in here, and I just want to make sure that it's alive. What it's going to do is it's going to foam up, and it's going to start being like a sort of almost like a yeast for baking bread in that aspect. So it'll actually start to rise in here. It'll actually start to foam up, and once it's coming up, it'll actually start to foam over the top of the lid. I know that it's alive, and I know that it's active. And that way then I'll be able to add it to my solution here. When I do add it in the year, I need to add it at no less than 4 degrees difference to it. So if this is at 80 degrees, I gotta make sure that my yeast solution here is at about 80 degrees, 82, 83. The closer you get it, the better it is, because then you're not gonna put it into shock. If you put it in there and this is at 40 degrees and your yeast is at 80, you're gonna kill most of your yeast cells, and you're not gonna have the fermentation that you want.
Which is one reason we added hot water to our honey to shock any yeast that might be in that. Some mead makers will actually boil their honey mixture to kill any yeast that are in it. But we haven't done that. Basically what we do is put hot water in to shock it and then add our other yeast before it really starts working.
So this is really 3 simple ingredients. You have honey, water, and yeast. The yeast apparently is something extremely important in the process. Where did you, I mean, you're a winemaker, you can get all the different products, but where would someone who wants to experiment with this try this?
It's a good place is Presque Isle Wine Cellars. They have a VAS. You can go online, it's piwine.com. You go in there and you can look at all the different types of yeast that they have, the different things. They even sell these there as well. All the things that I use today, they sell them there at that place.
And at minimum, you're going to need yeast and some of the equipment, the moisture, 22 bricks, things like that.
Yeah, the hydrometer.
You can buy all the pieces of parts.
All those there.
Yeah.
Even any of the home wine beer brewers and stuff like that, they have all that. And there's several of them located around. There's a lot more of them coming on. There's one in Hunterdon, there's one down George Trent and stuff. But any place that you can search online and get any of that stuff.
You wanted to do this at home, Roger? How much do you think setup would be?
You can do as much as you want and get involved.
That's with everything.
I'm fortunate to have a winemaker in my family
Yeah.
to help me do this and use his facilities. But to get set up, you're talking a couple $100 by the time you go with your test equipment and stuff. The cheaper way would probably be to go with your hydrometer versus your fractometer. But he used the fractometer to actually go out in the field and measure the sugar content in a grape before you harvest.
Right. You also use that to check your honey, right? To see what the level of moisture is before you bottle and things like that, right?
There is different levels of fractometers. This is a lower level than what you would use for testing your actual.
Okay.
That one only goes up to about 30. Yeah, that one only goes about 30 bricks, where your honey is about 68, 69 bricks.
Interesting. Okay.
So you're looking.
I see this bubbling here.
It's bubbling because it's warm. It's warm and it's cool in here.
Yeah.
And once it gets down, once it starts fermentation, then you'll see these bubbles will actually remain, because it'll almost look like a simmering pot of water.
Yeah.
Once the stuff gets going.
How much for one of these?
The yeast is probably going to be about $20, $25.
Yeah.
The most expensive thing here is actually the honey.
Yeah.
Once you have all this equipment, the equipment you can reuse
over and over.
And
people use it for winemaking, they also make beer,
Yep.
right? For the same equipment, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
depending on
exactly what you're doing. You're doing the same exact thing, whether or not you're keeping the fermentation going for doing beer, or where you're making a still fermentation to it for wine. But once you have all this equipment, I mean, these carboys here are about 25, 26 bucks.
This is plastic, by the way.
This one here is plastic. It's a type of, I think, EK grouse. We get it off at that place there. And they sell these ones here. It's a little bit easier for handling, because you don't have to worry about putting it down on cement or something like that. You just put some of those glass
Don't worry about dropping it.
Yeah, you put some of those glass ones down and you put them on a stone or something like that, and you can crack them and bust them up. Or these ones here, you don't have to worry nearly as much. And they come, I have not had any problems with staining in them. I've put several batches of even red wine through here, and it comes out crystal clear every time.
I mean, you could actually use like your water jugs from Poland Springs or something like that, but sometimes it is a lower grade, and you might get some staining, and not that it will really hurt.
Right.
I've used that in the past, but then when I started making some more, and he had some, we bought some other containers, some of your homebrew places, you can even get a smaller quantity of yeast. Rather
I've
than
seen
buying
a small little
You
packet.
get 15,
Yeah.
that's a 500 gram packet. You can
Yeah.
get them in 15 gram packets. But the other thing with like the Poland spring water ones and stuff like that, you may have a harder time trying to get a bung to actually fit in and be like airtight on you. Where these ones here are designed.
So to that point, back there is a simple milk jug. You know, if people wanted to make this stuff at home, I'm assuming you have to have one of these in order.
They have different sizes of these.
Yeah.
These bungs at like Home Depot or whatever, and they're in those metal shelves, and you can get them down to like size 5, size 6. This happens to be a size 10.
Yeah.
But you can get ones that are fitted for a different size, and then you just gotta.
So you started with gallons of honey, but people could start literally with a pint or you know a quart and make smaller batches for this to do experimentation.
So the rule of thumb is about you've seen us put about 4 gallons into the 1 gallon, and it come out almost to.
So you said your yeast in there. How long would you leave it to bloom before you add it?
Once this is going to take about another half hour, 40 minutes before this is where I want it to be. Once I get to this section where I want to add it in there, then the fermentation is probably going to take about another, with the cooler temperatures in here, it's probably going to take about another 2 to 3 weeks for the fermentation to go. The warmer it is in here, the quicker the fermentation is going to be, the more active the yeast is going to be.
So this is a good fall-winter activity, right? Where it's a little bit cooler.
A little bit cooler. You can do it down in your basement, especially out of the sunlight. Another thing you don't want is, the bright sun coming in on here, because the ultraviolet rays is also going to break down anything that's going on in there. So down in your basement, where it's nice and cool, it's about 65, 70 degrees in your basement, is a good place to do it.
So you do it for 3 weeks. You could do it for more. Longer is better, or
longer is better on the fermentation because you're going to trap more of your flavors in your finished product. Is what you're looking for. The quicker the fermentation, more heat, the more this is bubbling and gurgling out of it. That's all your characteristics that are coming out of it. So you want to keep it a little bit slower fermentation, a little bit cooler, keep everything in there, and then at that point, then it's just the clarifying. I'll put some bentonite in here. Bentonite is like a clay. Bentonite, you can buy that at those places too, Prescott and everything. It's a cleaning, clarifying agent. It's a clay base. What it does is it attracts the positive ions and it drops them to the bottom, and that's when you rack off.
So you add that product in?
I'll add that product in here, I'll stir it in, the bentonite will be in there, and what it'll do is it'll attract all the positive ions and it'll drop to the bottom, and that's what you call your must.
And if you get any of that in your drink, it won't harm you?
Well, what it's going to do is it's going to drop down to the bottom. There'll be a thin little layer down here at the bottom. So this will all clear out. This will all be nice and clean. So all that will drop down to the bottom, and then you just take a siphoning hose and you just start siphoning from the top and just working your way down to that sediment on the bottom.
Okay.
So then you just leave that in the bottom and then wash it out in the sink.
And it really wouldn't hurt you. All it is a clay. Which settles to the bottom, and it's clean dirt.
Yeah, it makes sense. So your mead that you made there, that's from January of this year.
Right. That's what we
it's December 13, and this is January 13.
Yeah, and this actually really fermented slow. This took a couple of months to ferment out.
Yeah.
We had problems with the temperature. It was very cold in the tank room here last year. We took it down to the one other building down here, and it still was mighty slow. He ended up taking it up to the office where it was much warmer to finish it up. But it did take a long time to ferment this off, and this is one of the best ones we've made yet.
How do you know when it's done? Stops bubbling?
Well, it's going to stop bubbling and everything starts settling out and it starts clarifying. You'll see, especially in these glass containers, you'll actually start to see the top start to clear as everything.
So to that point, making it in a glass container is your advantage, right? Instead of something that's...
That way then you can see exactly what's going on and stuff like that. The other thing that I'll be doing later, once this is going, I'll actually have a brown bag over it. I'll take a ShopRite bag or whatever, cut a hole on top of it and slide it down so that the sun doesn't shine on it.
And then how long will it last in the container? Forever?
If you're doing a dry mead, where you're doing the fermentation completely, you'll get a good 5 years out of it.
Yeah. Tastes better over time, or?
I generally
it's something you want to drink pretty quickly, right? Is my understanding.
After about 6 months, you want to put it in the bottle for about 6 months if you have the patience to wait 6 months to taste it.
Some of your drier, more acidic ones, they seem to mellow out as they age a little bit.
Yeah.
I have some, especially like that sizer that we made. when we first tasted that, that was brutal. It was like airplane fuel filtered through a bar, partly straw bale.
Yeah,
but now that was 2.5 years ago. I had a bottle of that last week. You sampled some.
I had a taste of it. It was really good.
And it mellowed out quite a lot.
Yeah.
And the same way with this here. I mean, I'm sure everyone was surprised at the flavor of this that come through. And like I say, this is the best one that we've made yet.
Yeah. It's what we call bottle shock. When you put it into the bottle, it has a little bit of shock characteristic to it, and it softens up with aging.
Yeah.
I brought this partly to show and also to give to you, Kevin.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's very nice of you. And I will enjoy this, trust me, because we had a little taste this week, and it's an excellent product. So.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I can't thank you enough for this. I appreciate the show, and good luck with this experimentation, and we'll be back to try it out.
Well, when we get ready to rack this off or something, we'll invite you back, and you can add on to this segment.
Yep, we'll come back and we'll pick up on the next couple pieces and go there. So thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Trevor.